Why? Under tension, our speech no longer feels governed by the self you recognize. You don't recognize your own self in that moment. So if you listen carefully to people describing these moments, you'll notice something important. They don't describe saying the wrong thing. They describe losing themselves mid-sentence. Then they say things like, oh, it just came out. Oh, I don't know where that came from. Oh, I wasn't thinking. Oh, I didn't mean it like that. This pattern becomes clearer when you examine real situations over time. Consider a professional dispute that escalates unexpectedly. A colleague raises a procedural concern in an email. The message is brief, neutral, and ambiguous. The recipient reads it quickly and responds immediately. The reply is longer, firmer, more detailed than necessary. It addresses points that were not raised. It closes with a sentence that feels final. And after sending it, the sender feels uneasy. We've all done that many times, whether it's even a message or an email. Sometimes we say more than that is necessary. Sometimes the tone in an email or a message comes across differently to what was intended. There is a strange experience that happens after certain conversations, not during them, but afterwards. When the room is quiet again, when the other person has gone, when the urgency has drained away and you are left alone with your own words, you replay what you said. And what's unsettling isn't just regret, it's not even embarrassment. It's distance, a quiet sense that the person who spoke a few minutes ago does not fully feel like you. You don't think, I should have said that. You think, why did I say it like that, or worse, that doesn't sound like me at all. The words were yours, the voice was yours, but the authorship feels questionable. This experience is common but rarely examined properly. People rush past it with familiar explanations. I was tired, I was stressed. They pushed my buttons, it was the heat of the moment. I've used many of those myself, no doubt. Those explanations soothe discomfort, but they don't answer the real underlying question. Because the question isn't why the situation was tense. The question is always why. Under tension, our speech no longer feels governed by the self you recognize. You don't recognize your own self in that moment. So if you listen carefully to people describing these moments, you'll notice something important. They don't describe saying the wrong thing. They describe losing themselves mid-sentence. Then they say things like, oh, it just came out. Oh, I don't know where that came from. Oh, I wasn't thinking. Oh, I didn't mean it like that. These aren't excuses. They are accurate descriptions of something that actually happened. Speech occurred without ownership, and that should disturb us more than it does. We like to believe that. When we speak, we are expressing a considered position, even if imperfectly. That words pass through intention, reflection, and meaning before emerging as language. And that speech which came out of our mouth is a conscious act authored by a stable mind. But that belief doesn't survive contact with real life. In moments of pressure, the speech often bypasses intention entirely. The mouth moves before the mind has settled. The words form faster than observation. The tone locks in before reflection has a chance to intervene. And once the speech begins, it carries itself forward through momentum rather than meaning. This is why the confusion arrives later and allows one person to ponder in hindsight. After the moment passes, intention returns, perspective returns, the broader self comes back online, and suddenly you're left trying to reconcile the two versions of yourself, the one who spoke and the one now listening back and looking in hindsight. That moment of reflection has a lot of lessons for us, because we then end up asking ourselves those questions and carry out that moment of self-introspection. You ask yourself, why you escalated, why you sounded so certain, why you pushed harder than you intended. And the answer always feels sort of wrong, in the sense that that was not satisfying. It's not a true reflection of your own self as to the way you conducted yourself. But at the same time, because you're asking the wrong questions, you are asking why you did what you did, when the choice was no longer in the loop. What took over in that moment wasn't intention or values, it was a narrower system whose job is not expression but resolution. Under pressure, the human system prioritizes discharge over dialogue, release over accuracy, stability over alignment. Speech becomes a way to end discomfort, not communicate the truth. This is why often people speak with urgency that surprises even themselves, why explanations pile up rapidly, why certainty sharpens, why silence always feels unbearable. And this is the time when we end up saying the things we regret, because sometimes we think, okay, right, now my relationship with this person has broken. Let me just offload whatever I have building inside of me may have been for years, which I've never been able to say before. Let me just take it out and dump it on this person now. This is what we do in that moment, because the goal at that moment in time isn't to be right. The goal is to make that feeling inside of us stop, that feeling, that discomfort. So that's why we want to let it all out. And words are the fastest available tool at that moment in time at our disposal. So later on, when that calm returns, the reflective self looks back and doesn't recognize the performance, not because the words were false, but because they were produced under a different operating condition, a condition where the speed mattered more than meaning, where pressure mattered more than presence, where ending the momentum mattered more than representing the self accurately. This pattern becomes clearer when you examine real situations over time. Consider a professional dispute that escalates unexpectedly. A colleague raises a procedural concern in email. The message is brief, neutral, and ambiguous. The recipient reads it quickly and responds immediately. The reply is longer, firmer, more detailed than necessary. It addresses points that were not raised. It closes with a sentence that feels final. And after sending it, the sender feels uneasy. We've all done that many times, whether it's even a message or an email. Sometimes we say more than that is necessary. Sometimes the tone in an email or a message comes across differently to what was intended. So going back to this message, so let's say this, in this scenario, the sender feels uneasy after sending it, not sort of guilty uneasy, but just a bit uncomfortable. The words look correct on screen, but something about the tone feels heavier than intended. A day later, the colleague responds politely but distantly. Communication becomes formal. What could have been a short clarification turns into a prolonged tension. Looking back weeks later, the sender realizes something uncomfortable. The reply wasn't written to clarify the issue. It was written to stop the internal discomfort created by the email. Speech ended the feeling, relationship absorbed the cost. Now remember that. The email was sent, but there was a cost. The cost was it fractures that professional relationship. And this is exactly what happens in our own social circles as well, that we're so keen to send that message out to put the other person right, but there's a cost. We may have hurt the other person's feelings, sometimes unintentionally, but we end up doing that because we're so hell-bent on writing a long email to justify our stance. And this is a common theme and a common issue out there. Or let's consider a different kind of a setting. Let's say in a community setting where you're working with volunteers. A volunteer leader is questioned about a decision made for an event. The question is raised publicly, perhaps in a group discussion. The leader responds quickly, calmly, but with unmistakable authority. The response frames the decision as obvious, necessary, and already settled. The group moves on. Later, the leader feels oddly dissatisfied. The decision was defensible. They thought they was doing something right at that time. The explanation was accurate, but something was not right. And what it was that there was some form of misalignment. So over the time, fewer people speak up in meetings, suggestions dry up, the leader becomes frustrated with the group's passivity, never connecting it to that earlier moment. Once again, the unowned speech stabilized the moment and quietly reshaped the environment. Or consider written communication in a family dispute. This is a very common one as well. A sibling sends a message expressing hurt. The recipient reads it while busy, replies quickly, and includes a line that sounds reasonable but dismissive. Afterwards, the sender rereads the message and feels surprised by how cold it sounds. They didn't intend to shut the conversation down, but they did. Days later, the sibling that the message was sent to goes silent, maybe silent for weeks. The relationship cools down without a clear rupture. In each of these cases, the speech was not intended to be malicious, but just functional. It reduced discomfort. And because it reduced discomfort, it was reinforced. This is how unowned speech becomes habitual, not because people want to be harsh or distant, but because their system learns that speed brings relief. Relief is persuasive. The mind does not ask whether relief came at a cost. It only registered that tension dropped, even though just for that moment in time. That is enough for the behavior to be repeated. Over time, this repetition creates like a behavioral sort of style. So some people become chronically certain, they speak with confidence that discourages dialogue. Others become quietly withdrawn, they speak briefly and disengage emotionally. I remember this has happened to me in previous occasions where somebody sent something in a group, in a sort of work setting, voluntary community group. We criticized something, maybe it was a suggestion, and the person becomes withdrawn to such an extent that they want to step down from their role because they felt undermined. And that was such a big rupture in that community panel that we had, that at the time the person like me sending that message didn't feel it, didn't think that we were undermining or challenging the person. We thought we were doing something constructive by dissuading a particular idea or criticizing the idea that came forward, but from a productive point of view, but that necessarily doesn't come across in the way it was intended. So this is a common theme in the way we send messages and how we disrupt these conversations in the name of being efficient. And all these styles share one function. They shorten and disrupt the comfort at that time. But what we don't realize is that over a period of time, it has a corrosive effect on other aspects of our work and those relationships. This cost rarely appears immediately. It shows up later in patterns that feel puzzling from the inside. Why do conversations feel transactional? Why do people seem guarded? Why does feedback stop coming? Why does intimacy feel thin? From within, it feels like circumstances or other people have changed. From outside, it looks like a predictable behavior, an outcome of repeated unowned speech. And this is why we need to always stop, think, reframe our messages, our questions, our speech. The reflection alone doesn't fix a problem. Reflection happens when conditions are calm. The collapse happens when they are not. Insight gained later cannot automatically intervene earlier. The interruption must happen at the level of timing, not understanding. The only reliable signal is the urgency. Then that urgency announces itself clearly even if it's subtle, it feels like pressure to respond, pressure to clarify. In that moment of urgency, when you obey your sort of ego, you say something, it will later on feel foreign and it will be regretful, because in that moment you will definitely say the wrong thing that you will later regret. That's why delay at that moment in time would be the most wisest thing to do, because by creating that space between feeling that discomfort and moving forward to say something, it may feel like a weakness that you stay sort of quiet. It's like you're losing ground. But that discomfort is the time that you stop, pause, reflect, and not put yourself under the pressure to say something that which you will later on feel that that was not you. That was something that, in the heat of the moment you've said that. And many people believe that restraint on that moment feels like suppression. It does not. Suppression hides speech. Restraint delays it until it can be owned. This is a very important distinction, because when restriction is present, words arrive slowly, heavier, more deliberate, not because they are rehearsed, but because they are allowed to pass through the self, the filtering process through of wisdom, before which you previously, if you say it fast, then you remove all these filters and you say something which will be completely different to your own character. And this is why speech spoken later with pause, with reflection, often sounds different, softer, more precise, less urgent and more recognizable. Not because you changed your mind, but because the self was present again. This is why ancient teachings emphasize restraint even under moments of anger, agitation, not as moral virtue, but as protection against self-misrepresentation, because words spoken without inner steadiness were considered unreliable regardless of their truth. I've heard ancient wise teachers even say, when somebody says something to you in anger, completely ignore them. Even when you reflect on it later on and try and remember what they said, ignore it, because that was not that person speaking. It was something else. That's why you cannot keep remembering that, keep focusing on that, and let that become a barrier between you and them. Even modern psychology looks at this, and they've also arrived at the same conclusion, but in a different language. Under pressure, the system optimizes for resolution, not representation. And different vocabulary, same reality. The work here is preventative. It's not about saying the perfect thing. It's about recognizing when the conditions for speech are compromised and refusing to pretend they are not. Sometimes the most aligned response is silence. Sometimes it is acknowledging discomfort without trying to resolve it at that moment in time. And at that moment in time, maybe saying less or saying nothing is better than saying something which you will later regret. So these responses do not feel satisfying in the moment. They do not offer the relief quickly, because sometimes we want to say something, get it off our chest, and the other person should really get it from you. But they preserve something far more important. They preserve the ability to recognize yourself later. So just to recap, the main thing is that we feel that you want to have the last word in the conversation, because holding that silence will be uncomfortable, and it would feel like you are suppressing yourself. It feels like letting a moment remain unresolved when every habit inside of you wants to close it. This is unsettling, because we are trained to believe that confidence means immediate response, that strength means we have to give that response, that composure means having something ready to say. But the deeper strength is often the opposite. It's the ability to stay with uncertainty without rushing to escape it, the ability to remain present when there is no satisfying sentence available yet, the ability to feel exposed, challenged, or misunderstood without immediately correcting the picture. We have been trained to be constantly speaking and firing the ammunition from our mouth with our words, and silent as a remedy, as a form of composure, is very rarely taught. But the fact is, if you look around, the most wisest people are the ones who speak less. And when you're in a social circle and the person who dominates the conversation is the loudest, probably the joker of the pack who says the most, tells the most stories, is the one that people will take the least serious. People who will probably sort of respect the least amount. That's why there's virtue in being silent and saying the least amount as well. This is something that we are not taught, and we are taught the opposite. We do the opposite of that, and this is not the wise thing to do. And this is because the speech comes too easily to us. It comes out quickly because of a habit. We think it serves the moment. Yes, it does, but not the truth. It serves as a relief at that moment in time, but not necessarily aligned to the bigger picture, to the real solution. And that relief normally does not last very long as well. So what remains is the residue, the distance, the confusion, the sense that something important slipped away unnoticed. So the work you're being invited into here is not dramatic. No one will applaud it. It won't feel like progress in the way modern culture defines progress. It will feel slower. Conversations may take longer. Silence may appear more often. You may find yourself speaking less but meaning more. You may notice that in some situations things don't resolve so quickly as they used to. But you may also notice something else, that when you do speak, you recognize yourself. Your words may feel more heavier in terms of that they carry more weight because they are your words that have filtered through a wisdom barrier and they've been thought out properly, and these conversations will be more meaningful. And this will reduce the gap between who you are and what you say. And this is how those moments will really define your identity and personality to others, because you will become better at speaking towards the truth and resolution, because you will be better and more patient as a person, waiting long enough for the self to arrive. This is something that you must master once, and it will remain with you forever. It will serve you far better than your current habits and patterns which cause you to rush into saying something which you later regret. And just remember what I mentioned earlier about the wise people that we respect are the ones who say the least amount, and when they speak, their words carry weight and their words feel like gold, in the sense that you want to listen to them and you value them. And if you want to become one of those people, then you need to slow down and take ownership of what you say, and therefore weigh every speech before it is delivered, even if it is in that moment where you feel that you cannot control yourself. That is what true integrity is. This is where you should be operating from if you truly want to be successful in all aspects of your life, especially in managing people and relationships.